me something after what I taught, not changing what I taught, but I want to modify or add to what I taught. Turn to Jeremiah chapter 35. Jeremiah chapter 35. One of the very passages that kind of led me to say that, look, you can't teach the Bible doesn't teach abstinence when it comes to wine, alcohol, that kind of thing. It doesn't teach total abstinence. And I stick to that, but there's something the Lord showed me. He said, well, look at this. And in Jeremiah 35, let's just read a little bit of this. Verse 1 said, the word which came into Jeremiah from the Lord in the days of, I'm not in the right place, am I? Am I? Okay, yeah. In the days of Joachim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, saying, go into the house of the Rechabites, and speak unto them, and bring them into the house of the Lord, into one of the chambers, and give them wine to drink. Then I took Jaazaniah, the son of Jeremiah, the son of, Habazaniah, and his brethren, Noah's sons, and the whole house of the Rechabites, and I brought them into the house of the Lord, to the chamber of the sons of Hanan, the son of Igdaliah, a man of God, which was by the chamber of the princes, which was above the chamber of, we go on, okay. He says, and I set before the sons of the house of the Rechabites pots full of wine and cups, and said unto them, drink ye wine. But they said, we will drink no wine. For Jonadab, the son of Rechab, our father, commanded us, saying, ye shall drink no wine, neither ye nor your sons forever. So, what you're told here is that the Lord says, give them wine. Now, I don't think if the Lord's giving them wine, he's not going to tempt any man to do evil. Okay? So, it's not evil to drink wine. It's evil to be drunk. But it's not evil to drink wine. But he tries to give them wine. I'm going to say this. It may not even have been fermented wine. It may have just been new wine, because they weren't drinking any wine, new or old. Okay? But the point here is that God didn't give that commandment. The Father did. And his children were obeying a commandment that the Father gave. And then it kind of dawned on the Lord, said, so you see that? You can't teach abstinence, but you can preach abstinence. In fact, here you have a father preaching abstinence to his children. Why? Because he fears that vine. Look at Numbers chapter 6. You know, America is bad about drunkenness, bad about booze, wrecked more families than you can shake a stick at. I don't know what the divorce rate is because of drunkenness, but it's incredible. It's destroyed more lives. Drugs coming right in. Probably drugs will overtake alcohol if it hasn't already because of fentanyl and all that. I mean, fentanyl will kill you. But the amount of destruction that's in the path of these things, I can see why a father would preach abstinence to his children. I think that is a grand idea, that they don't ever touch it. Because if you never touch it, you'll never have to worry about being addicted to it. And for some people, it's not a problem, but you don't know that you're not that problem until you've dabbled with it. And then you find out you are. I don't understand it. I don't understand. There's some people that it's like what I remember what Brother Yoakum said about the Indian that took the drink and never left. He never left that mark that sold him that booze. He never left the area. He's still there as far as I know. What is it? And yet some people can partake, and they can and not even get drunk and have that ability to control themselves, and some people can't. Who wants to take that chance with their children? I think a lot of that has to do is when it's introduced, or when it's like this. It's like some people, they could, if they did sample it, they have such control because they weren't raised with that thing. You know, when you get these appetites when you're young, okay? Those of us who weren't raised in a Christian home, we got appetites earlier. I think that's destructive for children. When they get those appetites early, they hardly ever shake them. We're seeing that in the jail over and over and over again. They're back in there for the same thing. Why? They're addicted to something. And they're young. So this father says, no wine. Don't care what it is, new or old, no wine. Not a bad idea. Not a bad idea at all. Number 6 says this, and this is the vow of the Nazarite. It's pretty much what he did to his whole family. By the way, you could be a woman and take the vow of a Nazarite according to this. It says in verse 2, speaking to the children of Israel and saying to them, when either man or woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazarite, to separate themselves unto the Lord. I guess I've read that before, but it just never really did sink in that a woman could take the vow of a Nazarite. You know what he's talking about here? This is a picture of separation, and it's about that vine. It's about that vine tree. And he says he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink. So to take the vow, you cannot partake of wine or strong drink. Obviously, they could have before the vow. Now, they could not be drunk. Yeah, I keep having to say that because I feel this Baptist pressure behind me, you know, like somebody's getting ready to club me like they would a seal. Drunkenness is a sin. Nobody's talking about anything here. Do you know there's a passage of Scripture where he tells the children of Israel to go and buy whatever they want, wine or strong drink? And he tells them to go and buy it and then partake of it. Bible says that God can't tempt any man to do evil. Now, if you're an alcoholic, that's a temptation. If you're not an alcoholic and you have control of yourself, then that's not a temptation. You're not being tempted to do evil. Point being here, it's a picture of separation. And they weren't even allowed to drink vinegar, which is twice fermented. That's wine that's been twice fermented. That turns it to vinegar. That's non-alcoholic, but they weren't even allowed to drink vinegar. So, or vinegar of strong drink, any type of vinegar that's been twice fermented. Neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes. That would be like the grape juice. Nor eat moist grapes or dried. Man can't eat raisins. Why? Because it all came from that vine. And you know where that vine showed up? It showed up in the garden. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil was a vine tree. And that pictures a separation from the things of this world. So a man that will preach that kind of absence of drugs, absence of alcohol, absence of dance halls and bars or whatever, any man that will preach that to his family is doing a good thing for his children, not to partake of such a thing. Because how many of them go into something like that? They're not trained not to. They're not disciplined not to. And what happens? They get into something and you find out that addiction takes them it just takes them. We see it so often, it's unbelievable. And we're looking at them like, why can't you just, and they look at you like, can't stop. It's all I think about. It's all I want. It's all I desire. I just think about that feeling. I think about that euphoria. I think about that thing that comes over me. And they can't get past it. So you may not be able to teach abstinence from the Bible, but you sure can preach it. So that's what I wanted to clarify. And in this day and age, with what Paul suggested that Timothy use it for, you have so many avenues now that, I mean, come on, man, we got probiotics, we got everything for your stomach, every kind of possible medicine. You go to a drugstore and there are 15, 20 rows of drugs. I mean, how many did they have back in the day? You had the apothecary where somebody's mixing up some weeds or something, that they, heroin, yeah, maybe, yeah, probably, definitely in China. So anyway, I wanted to just show you that because that's exactly what Jonadab did. He preached abstinence to his children. And the Lord commended the man for it. He said, there'll always be a man standing before him of that house. That means those kids, his great, they're alive today. The other thing is, though, you can't take that thing too solid, because he also told them they couldn't dwell in houses. They were to dwell in tents. They were nomadic. You know, almost like this world is not my home. So, okay, Romans chapter 15. And these are some of the final words concerning doubtful things. He goes on here for a few verses. He says, we then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to please ourselves. Let every one of us please his neighbor for his good to edification. For even Christ pleased not himself, but as it is written, the reproaches of them that reproached thee fell on me. Now, you kind of have to read that with the last two verses of chapter 14 in mind. And he says, hast thou faith? Have it to thyself before God. Happy is he that condemneth not himself in that thing which he alloweth. And he that doubteth is damned if he eat, because he eateth not of faith, for whatsoever is not of faith is sin. So when he says, we then that are strong, okay, he's talking about Christians that have this thing settled in their mind. They're not like, I don't know if I should or shouldn't. Then don't. Well, I'm not sure if it's not sin. Then don't. If you don't have a clear conscience before God, if it's not something that you're sure about, if there's something your body tells you it's not good for you, then maybe it's not good for you. And that could be anything, man. That could be a cup of coffee. I mean, I can't tell you how many Christians I've met, a lot of Christian men, a lot of preachers, that couldn't drink coffee. Y'all remember, who's the fella? Oh, out of Texas, Corpus Christi. Lester Roloff. Bless his heart, the man couldn't eat anything. Couldn't drink anything. I mean, and he preached against everything. He preached against Coca-Cola. He preached against coffee. I mean, because he himself, he couldn't handle it. His body, he was a wreck. And him and Peter Ruckman, they'd get together in the same meeting, and Peter Ruckman could, he could eat a dead possum off the ground. It wouldn't bother him. He said, and it would bother, it would kind of, I don't know, he was a good sport about it, but it would, I guess it was something to behold watching Dr. Ruckman eat a meal. Because, he didn't stop. I've heard this. I don't know that it's true. I haven't never ate a meal with a man. But it's that he wouldn't stop with the bones. He'd break open the bones and suck out the marrow of a chicken bone. Now I don't think I've ever done that. And drive Lester Roloff just crazy, because he could. He talked about one time where they're getting ready to preach, and he said he was all stuffed up. And Dr. Ruckman was, and he said, go get me some, what's that stuff you love that's white and real strong? Horseradish. Jar of horseradish. Took a whole spoonful and just put it in his mouth. It cleared him right up, man. Probably would have killed Roloff. He'd have dropped over dead. So we then that are strong. Some people have strong stomach. Some people are strong in the faith. This is all based on what you know. That's what this is talking about. It's what you know. We then are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to please ourselves. So then, the weak Christian is the one who is tender and has a sensitive conscience. Why? Because he thinks it's wrong. He thinks something, and sometimes they are so weak in the faith because they can't, they believe you can't. But they would be wrong. What might be okay for you would not be okay for them. But they're sensitive, okay? The strong Christian is seasoned, tolerant, and supposed to be supportive of that weaker brother. In other words, he realizes, when you get a new convert in here, you notice, and this church is really good about it. I mean, you deserve some praise. You don't jump on them. You don't start, picking them apart. You don't start pointing out things, because there's a whole lot of things you could point out today. You say, why? Because we're going to let God do it. And what we do is we just kind of stand back and not be too, teach the word, preach the word, and let that work on him. I can tell you that God worked on me. He worked on me about appearance. He worked on me about hair. He worked on me about music. He worked on me about everything. Smoking. He worked on me on those things. I didn't need some Christian to come tell me. I mean, and they were probably welcome to. I don't know if I would take offense or not. I mean, I was too stupid to take offense. I couldn't tell when somebody was aiming it right at me. But that's okay, But I did grow. But when I made my decision for God, I never changed it. If I made that modification, I felt like that's what God wanted, that's the way it was. So a strong Christian, seasoned. They're tolerant, they're supportive, weaker brethren. It's like, a seasoned Christian could go into a place that worships Allah, a meat shop, where it says halal on it, where the meat's supposed to be clean, and I don't know if they have I don't know who blesses that, but it'd be like going in and having a rabbi bless the meat at a Jewish shop, I could buy that meat, take it home, put it on the grill, cook it up, and eat it. I don't care if Beelzebub, they blessed it. I don't care if Beelzebub got the blessing. It wouldn't matter to me. Why? The idol's nothing. The idol is nothing. I know that. There's nothing wrong with that meat. There's nothing unclean of itself. But to him that esteemeth something to be unclean, to him it is unclean. You see how that works? Okay, but then, we've talked about the weak Christian. We talked about the strong Christian that's tolerant. But then we have the super pious Pharisee. Oh yeah, there's three different folks dealing. There's the super pious Pharisee who has eradicated his outward sins. In other words, he's cleaned up his act. He's got some personal control of himself, Maybe he's a military brat or something like that, but maybe he's got some self-control. But what he doesn't realize is that the same sin that was on the outside is still on the inside. That's what he doesn't realize. That yes, he's not performing or consuming or doing those things that he once did, but it's all still there. Why? Because that's where it originated from. You can get rid of all the things, and guess what? You're still stuck with the lust. It's still there, intact, and will be till the day you die or the day God blows the trumpet, calls you out. You will have that same thing there. Now, maybe you're the Rock of Gibraltar. You can suppress it, but don't get high and mighty with somebody else that can't or has a problem with it. What happened was, and that's the same. These Pharisees showed up, and they were intruding on people's liberty. You can't do that. Bible says in the Old Testament you can't do that. Oh, you got to. It's tabernacles. You've got to be home. You can't. And imposing things on them. Now, if you're living in Israel, you might be subject to some things. I think you're even subject to the Sabbath. It doesn't matter whether you're a Jew or a Gentile, but you're in their territory. We're talking about in Galatia, where we're up in an area where those things have no power over the people living there, and yet those Pharisees were imposing that on Christians. They were imposing new moons. They were imposing what they could eat. And they were intruding on their, and it wasn't because, I think it's wrong. I mean, they had an Old Testament verse, but they were doing it because they were being pharisaical about it. They wanted to control them. And you're always going to have that. You're always going to have that one that comes in and just tells you everything's wrong. It was really bad back in the 70s. I mean, really bad. 80s too. I'd say late 70s, early 80s. They came in, they preached against everything. And some of the stupidest things you ever hear. From some of the greatest preachers you probably would ever listen to. And the problem is that when somebody does that to you and they wound your conscience, man. And now all of a sudden you're thinking what you're doing is wrong or what you're wearing is wrong. And the problem with that is maybe you can't afford to change what you've got. What do you do then? Some of us just let God do what he wants to do with people. You'd be surprised what he could do. He doesn't need your help that much. Thing is just to be there and be a support. And I'm not saying, we're not talking about people getting away with murder here. We're not talking about that. We're talking about doubtful disputations. The problem with the super pious Pharisee is pride becomes the besetting sin. The weak and the offended, that's that Pharisee. The weak and the offended have the same issue. They do. They have the same issue. They're identical. It's not the things, it's not the things that are evil. It's you. It's not the things, it's you. That's where realizing that Paul said, I know that in my flesh dwelleth no good thing. And it's recognizing that. You say, why? Well, think about this. Laziness, conceit, self-service, ingratitude, malice, envy, anger, selfishness, greed, or lust, just to name a few, are not sold in a bottle. They don't come in a pack. You can't find them on the grocer's shelf. They're in you. What are you going to do about that? What about all them? And to realize that the key to this thing is for a younger Christian, whatever you do, don't cause them to stumble and create an appetite that you have power over, but they may not. That's what the Lord's talking about here. In other words, hast thou faith? In other words, can you do it in faith? Can you do it believing that it's right before God and that God has no problem with you doing it? Fine. Keep it to yourself. If you've got that kind of faith, keep it to yourself. And the Bible tells us that growth is in stages. People come in here, and we got a lot of mature, seasoned Christians. We mainly have mature, seasoned Christians. Every now and then we'll get somebody that's unseasoned, and they need to grow. Hebrews 5, look at Hebrews 5, verse 12 to 14. Hebrews 5, verse 12 to 14. It says, for when for the time ye ought to be teachers, ye have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God, and are become such as have need of milk and not of strong meat. For everyone that useth milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. We call him a babe in Christ. But strong meat belongeth to them that are of full age. For even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. They can discern. Someone who is of full age, someone who has grown and matured in Christ, can discern whether something's good or evil. They're just not going on what their conscience might tell them, because your conscience can be dead wrong on something. As a matter of fact, that weak brother, that's his problem. He lacks knowledge. He's wrong about some things. And that's why he needs to grow. As he grows, he gets stronger. As he gets stronger, he realizes the idol's nothing. The problem is with me. That's when he'll get past a lot of this stuff of being critical about folks. And again, I want to say that I do believe you can preach on things. He mentioned in his message, make not provision to the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. Therefore, sometimes you have to preach against things, because it's those things that is causing that lust to be magnified or to come out. The last thing you want to do, it's like, you taking drugs or alcohol or anything that stimulates the lust in your heart. But that's where it's from. That's where it's at. It's the things that are causing it to come out and manifest itself and be worse. And God help you if you get an addiction. All right, moving on. Then he says there, in the last part of verse 1, we're not to please ourselves. Now, what that tells me is your goal is not to see how much Christian liberty you can practice and shove or throw in the face of someone else. Right? I mean, sometimes when we learn about Christian liberty, say, yeah, I got Christian liberty. Well, how he says here, he says you're not even to please yourself. So when it comes to your liberty or that brother's growth in Christ, you're to sacrifice your liberty. You're not to please yourself. Is that how you read it? That's how I read it. In other words, if it's going to cause them to stumble, don't do it. And don't even tell them about it. He goes on in verse 2, he says, let every one of us please his neighbor for his good edification. Now turn to Galatians 1:10. And somebody will point out, well, this is a contradiction in the Bible. Galatians 1:10 says, for do I now persuade men or God? Or do I seek to please men? For if I yet please men, I should not be the servant of Christ. Then he said, you're to let every one of us please his neighbor. Huh. Is that a contradiction? Well, not if you read the context. The context of Galatians chapter 1 is preaching the gospel, preaching the word. You're not to be a pleaser of men when it comes to that. In fact, you don't compromise not one word. But when it comes to Romans 14 and 15, it's about living an example before your neighbor. And then he says, please your neighbor. Be the example you need to be. Be the example to that brother in Christ. So one may be compromised and the other absolutely not. You say, well, what can you do? Well, you can alter your diet, right? I mean, if you had to. I mean, if we got a family of saved Jews in the church that were living a testimony and living according to the Levitical diet for their family's sake, we'd have to change some things around here, wouldn't we? But we could. For their sake, we could, couldn't we? Maybe they want to bring folks to visit the church. And we'd have to adapt to that. If we're going to have food back there, we can't have, we'd have to have meat hot dogs that are kosher instead of the pig ears and cow lips and eyelids we've been eating. Yeah. Have it to thyself. But you can adjust your diet. You can adjust your activities too. You could change your clothes to some degree, but not changing not one word in that book. Never compromising that out. He mentions there, let every one of us please his neighbor for his good to edification. In other words, don't blow the brother right out of the water before he's had a chance to learn something. You know? And sometimes that happens, man. I mean, sometimes, they go to a church and they'll converge. They seem to converge, and they want to just, well, you probably ought to do this, and, maybe you ought to change that, Nah. Let God handle it. The Bible says we have no such custom. Yeah. God will speak. I've seen it so many times, I don't even worry about it. Don't worry about it. God will take care of it. But if you wound them and you offend them and you run them off before God had a chance to edify them, I think the Lord holds you responsible for that. And like I said, we're not talking about something that's, immorality here. We're talking about a doubtful disputation. Now the Lord is, in verse 3, the Lord is the prime example. For even Christ pleased not himself, but as it is written, the reproaches of them that reproached thee fell on me. Talk about the reproaches that they aimed toward God fell on Jesus Christ. I can see why. If you think about it, look, the first man, this man that shows up is like God because he is God. But he's a man. So the reproaches, you ever thought about that? They killed him. Who were they really wanting to kill? Who was it that they truly hated and they had a problem with? The man who is the image of God. And then he says, well, if they hated me, you start acting like God, guess what? You start thinking like he thinks, have the mind of Christ. Philippians 2:6-7 says, who being in the form of God thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. He took on the form of a servant. The Lord Jesus Christ did not have to do that, but he did. Why? For our sakes. In Matthew 20:28, he says, even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. This verse comes to mind. Matthew 12:20 says this, a bruised reed shall he not break, and a smoking flax shall he not quench, till he send forth judgment unto victory. Jesus Christ didn't entangle himself in any matters that required him to judge. You know the one time where the guy comes to him and says, tell my brother to give me some of the inheritance. He said, hey man, he actually says, because he says, who made me a judge over thee? What? Isn't he the judge over all men? But he doesn't want to entangle himself. He said, I didn't come for that. He came to seek and to save that which is lost. And it says there that he wouldn't even bruise a reed or quench a smoking flax. If there was a family issue, and things going on in the family and things heated up, he didn't involve himself. Why? Wasn't why he was there. And I might add, you might want to mind your own business when it comes to things like that. Okay? Something about when you start meddling in other men's matters, it's like grabbing an angry dog by both ears. Okay? You're going to get bit. Which arm do you mind not having the teeth marks in it? Because the dog's going, ah, ah, ah. And the minute you let go, one arm's going to get bit. And that's when meddling in other men's matters. It's best not to do it. He mentions the reproaches there. He said, the reproaches of them that reproached thee fell on me. He said in Psalm 60, in fact, this is where it comes from, Psalm 69:9, for the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up, and the reproaches of them that reproached thee are fallen upon me. That's really telling when you think about it. The fact that these were the reproaches, this is the things that they had aught with God, so a God-man shows up, and those reproaches are on him now. And of course, I told you the same holds true for a Christian. John 15:18 says, if the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. Well, why would they hate you? Because you're acting like him. You're behaving like him. You're speaking like him. That's why they hate you. In Luke 6:22 and 23, he says, blessed are ye when men shall hate you, and when they shall separate you from their company, and shall reproach you, there's the reproach, and cast out your name as evil for the Son of Man's sake. Rejoice ye in that day, and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven, for in like manner did their fathers unto the prophets. We would always say, in Romania, we'd say, when we were cast out from them, I'd get up there and jump for joy, you know. Cast out and reproached. That happens when you start living like Jesus Christ. Verse 4. For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. This verse here debunks hyperdispensationalism. Why? Because hyperdispensationalism states you can only follow the Pauline epistles, and you disregard the rest of the Bible. I've never taught that. Now, I do teach that the Pauline epistles, because it is doctrine written for you, is your filter. But rightly dividing, what rightly dividing does, it tells you what to eliminate that you cannot take. The scriptures that you cannot take and apply them to you because they're not correct in this age, according to Paul's doctrine. But that leaves the rest of it that you can take. Right? So all you're doing is filtering out what you cannot take. You cannot take a verse that tells you you can lose your salvation. I can show you some, but they're not written to you. Right? Rightly dividing tells you to exclude that, so that doesn't apply to me. The Sabbath does not apply to me, Colossians chapter 2. The new moons and the feasts do not apply to me. But I can certainly learn from all those things too. The rest is on the table for you to enjoy. Things, he mentions there are things that were written aforetime. He's talking about the Old Testament. Are for our learning and comfort in verse 4. And for our admonition in 1 Corinthians 10:11. Now all these things happen unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. I don't know what's wrong with the hyper, but man, you need all of the Bible. Even the parts you're not applying, you need it to understand. To put things in a proper order. Only an idiot, I guess that's what I'm saying they are, only an idiot would exclude the comfort of the Psalms, the wisdom of the Proverbs, the worldview of Ecclesiastes, and the undying love of the Song of Solomon, and the patience of Job. Can you imagine life without those books? Or not getting something from those books? Okay, I'm going to stop there. I didn't get through my lesson tonight, but I did too much talking. I think what helps a Christian that's weak in the faith is he stays in the Scriptures. That's what we preach. We preach it at the jail. We preach it here. Get the book, stay in the book, stay in the book, stay in the book, stay in the book. Read, read, read. Let God teach you. Let God show you. Let God, because that's how you grow. Just think of it as food, sustenance for the spiritual man. I know how you grow this way and this way is because you're eating food, right? You're eating food. You're sustaining yourself. It's the same way with that spiritual man. And if you're saved, he will grow if you will just stay in the book and keep reading. Okay? Ask God to show you. After a while, you become so attuned to this book, so attuned to it, that you'll be reading something and all of a sudden, your mind goes over here to this verse, goes over to that verse, and it starts happening. You can't even help it. The Lord just starts making all these connections in your head. And you're like, wow, I've never seen that before. I never knew that before. Now, I'm sure, here's the way, whatever God's ever showed me, I figured he showed somebody else. I don't think I'm the only one. Oh, I got this. I'm not going to go that route. I think there's danger in that route. But I've saw some things and then later on found where somebody else had seen it, and maybe they saw it before I did, maybe they didn't, I don't know. But God showed you that. And when he shows you something like that, man, that just increases your thirst for more. I'm always wanting God to show me something. Show me something more, Lord. Because I love this book. I'm fascinated by God himself. Not just in love with him, I'm fascinated by him. I think he's a wonder to behold. Anytime I get in this book, I'm just like, show me. Because, to me, God is shock and awe. He really is. He's just shock and awe all the time. And this book is full of it. In fact, you can't exhaust it. That's why you always go to it and say, Lord, show me. Show me something. Teach me something today. And he will. And even though you'll read through, and you got to be careful. I used to be one of them readers where I read it and I didn't memorize it. Or not memorize it. I read it, but I didn't read it. How many of you do that? Read it, but you don't read it. I say, nope. I go back to where I lost my mind, and I start at that point, and I do it again. If it happens again, I'll read it out loud. And that is not letting your flesh not letting it do that. Everything's about controlling this flesh and making it focus. If I don't do this in the morning, I won't do it. I'm telling you. The minute I get up and things are moving around, forget it. I have got to do this first thing. My prayer and my Bible reading, I have to do immediately upon opening my eyes. I begin that process. Why? If I don't, I won't. Because I am not disciplined enough to control my body, to concentrate, because now I'm thinking about this and that and over here and got to do that. No, look at the lawn. I mean, everything starts filtering in. But if I do it now maybe you're different. Maybe at the end of the day, one thing about the end of the day is, you're praying at the end of the day, God, look what a miserable mess we're. If you'd have prayed in the morning, maybe you wouldn't have the miserable mess. You see, in the morning's a good time to pray. If you got to drive to work, pray on your way to work. Anyway, I don't know why I said all that. But I'll tell you what, the scriptures give you comfort, but he also says it gives you hope, that you might have hope. We need hope, folks. We need hope. Things are looking grim again. I mean, really grim. I don't know what's going to befall us in the next couple of months, but man, you better get ready. And just tell the Lord, Lord, whatever happens, you just help me to stay in there, do what I'm supposed to do. I mean, God didn't fall off the throne, but buddy, the whole world might get turned upside down on us. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But I think something is going to happen. No matter how it goes, even if it goes the way you want it to go, I got a feeling things are going to get really wild. And so, see, I'm not, when things are just normal, I want to know what I'm going to do when things don't, when they're not normal, when they're critical. I want to know what you're going to do when things are critical. But I especially want to know what I'm going to do. And I want to know that I have settled in my heart that I'm going to do the right thing no matter what happens. That's what I want to do. And that doesn't happen unless you're controlling this flesh. Because you're going to want to run for the hills, man. You're going to want to, I don't know. We'll see. You probably won't have a choice, though. You'll have to make a decision. It's like Job. What choice did he have? I mean, there he was. I mean, when it all befell him, it befell him in one day. And I don't know. I don't know what to think of something like that. If all of a sudden the whole country just goes upside down in one day, it could very well happen. You have no idea how it could happen. America's not promised anything. In fact, the only promise we do have is God said he will destroy us. He said, I'll destroy all the nations whither I've caused thee to flee. And the Jews came here. There's more Jews here than there is in Israel. Still, 51% here. And he said he will destroy all those nations whither those Jews fled to. And we're one of the biggest nations they fled to. So we're going to get destroyed. It's just, are we going to be around to be here when it happens? Don't know. So, all right. I don't know what that's got to do with doubtful disputations. Maybe that's doubtful teaching. Okay. Any questions or comments about what we covered? No? Okay. I got a bunch of prayer requests. Pray for Michael and Anna, and the kids are